Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, previewing the 2023 legislative session. Lawmakers have billions of dollars available, but what will they prioritize? And
I think we need to keep building the services and the programs that New Mexicans sorely need and desperately want.
The State House will have a new speaker when session begins in January. Nominee Javier Martinez explains his vision. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. Democrats in the Roundhouse will have a chance to make a big splash when they start the 2023 session in less than a few weeks. Coming up in about 25 minutes, New Mexico in Focus correspondent Russell Contreras sits down with the nominee for Speaker of the House, Javier Martinez, to ask how he will set the agenda. Then, in the second half of the show, I ask our panel of former state lawmakers if they support the idea of modernizing our state legislature. New polling shows the public supports changes like lengthening sessions and paying lawmakers. But is there enough time to get something passed this session? Lawmakers have a lot to consider in their 60-day assignment in Santa Fe. Now, at this point, we don't know for sure what will come up, but we have a pretty good idea. We've heard rumblings about action on abortion, rent stabilization, alcohol taxes, and gun control. In about 15 minutes, I ask our line panelists if raising the age to buy an automatic weapon is a smart move for our state. But we start with what will be the biggest factor at play in the Roundhouse next month: money. The state is in for a massive surplus as oil and gas revenue continues to boom. That could mean a lot of opportunities for Democratic leadership to push their agenda forward. Let's get to the line. We have the perfect group of panelists this week to talk about the upcoming session. Let's welcome everyone in. First, it's former State Senator Dee Dee Feldman. Another former state senator, that would be Diane Snyder. She's with us as well. And former State Representative Daniel Foley. Thank you all for being here. You all know what it's like to get ready for the upcoming session, all three of you, but not with the kind of money our state lawmakers have in front of them for 2023. State economists estimate government income of nearly $12 billion for the fiscal year running from July 2023 to June 2024. The important bit, that's $3.6 billion more than the annual general fund spending obligations right now. Daniel, can you explain the opportunity, I'm going to put opportunity in finger quotes here, for lawmakers have in front of them? Or is this a giant landmine ready to go off to make things very difficult for everybody? What end of the spectrum are we on here?
It's a little bit of both, right? First of all, I know, Gene, over the years, I give you grief all the time. You got to be extremely orgasmic with the fact that we can now solve every problem because we have all the money to solve every problem.
Somewhat.
One of the first things, and I think both the senators will agree with me, is, first of all, take these projections with a grain of salt, because we have in New Mexico, we have a balanced budget amendment. We have to produce a balanced budget.
Right.
And when I was in the legislature, we didn't always produce the budget based on the revenue. We created the revenue based on the budget, right? You'd go in, you'd say, here's what we're going to spend. And then we go back and we tinker with the price of oil, the price of gas. We'd have different things that come out. So I'm not sure that we'll have this much money. I think that it's going to fluctuate significantly between now and the time they get it. Remember, that may be what they have today. You're talking about getting through a 60-day session, getting all of the work done. At the earliest this money would be available would be July or August by the time they get the bonds sold and everything. So it could be a significant change, even though they think they have it. The real question is going to be, we're clearly a state that has a ton of needs. There's no doubt about it. I mean, our water situation isn't getting better. Our road situation isn't better. But, is it going to be the usual argument that seems to constantly present itself, which is, are you going to solve problems that exist, or are you going to create programs to solve problems that are going to require recurring funding? Because as we saw when Gary Johnson was governor, there was growth in some entitlement programs, and when he cut them, he got sued by the legislature, and the legislature prevailed and said he has the right to not grow that program anymore, but you can't do away with the people that were added. And my initial gut reaction is there'll be very little focus on spending the money on one-time options that money can solve a problem today. It'll be the groundwork and the sowing seeds for programs that are going to cost significant amounts of money that will be back when the downturn comes to discuss where do we get that money from.
That's a good point there. We'll circle back to that, the amount of money that's slated to just land in our laps here over the years. Senator Feldman, got to start here with you. We had a blue November here in New Mexico. There's no doubt about that. Democrats approaching this year's session with momentum. And what priorities are they planning on pushing forward? Any indications have you heard so far?
Well, the governor has a list, and I think that the legislature is grappling with this $3.6 billion in new revenue, and they have some proposals as well. From what I understand from the governor, the push is not going to be so much in creating new programs, because that is a danger. But in building on what already exists. Okay. And I think that there's some talk about money for family planning. There's talk about increases for education, but not just the usual teacher salary increases. Also reforms like increasing the number of hours that kids spend in school. Of course, her free lunch program has gotten a lot of publicity. That is something I think that merits some consideration, particularly since the state is going to be reacting to the withdrawal of federal money, or the end of federal money from COVID. Right. There were a lot of TANF monies. There were a lot of Medicaid monies that came to the state during COVID that will end. Saying that, I think that the legislators, and particularly in the Senate, have some plans for putting this new money into some permanent funds that are geared toward investing and solving some of the problems that we have. When Jean mentioned, when water was brought up, also environmental investments that would gradually get the state away from its dependence on oil and gas. And of course, that's the origin of all this new money. Interesting,
Senator Snyder, I'm glad Senator just mentioned oil and gas. 40% of this money is coming from oil and gas, and here we are having a lot of elected folks saying we need to get away from oil and gas. It's a classic New Mexico dilemma, but I guess my question for you is, for Republicans, it seems like there's a particular challenge coming up here. You've got excited Democrats coming in with numbers and a plan. And I'm curious where you think Republicans might be on how this all sort of unfolds over the session.
Well, things, Jean. I think the Republicans understand very clearly, because that's where a lot of them are from, is oil and gas country. And they know from their local level up to the state, even up to the federal government, what that impact is and how much money it is. So they also know from their own budgets and their own company that it's a boom bust cycle. And I'm like everybody else. I go, oh gosh, I wish I'd had that kind of $3.6 billion when I was in the Senate. Sure. Because one of the things that I've always been such a proponent of is permanent funds for our infrastructure. And infrastructure has grown now to mean not only roads and bridges, which, by the way, we're still right at the bottom of the pile for the safety of our bridges. And don't be confused that it's just crossing the Rio Grande. It's every little arroyo that is a bridge going over it, that on rural highways. And that's how you get fire trucks to your emergency vehicles. So we have, in the last couple of years, have looked at that a little bit and done some work. But we're also, infrastructure is also the internet, the World Wide Web. It's that impacts, and you take those areas, and infrastructure is not just somebody playing games on their computer or emailing. It's how we're teaching our children nowadays. So that was, if I'm not mistaken, part of the concern with the lawsuit that was brought about, that we don't treat our children equitably across the state. So They don't have that kind of infrastructure available. So those are things I'd like to see us do first. I think the practical kind of wisdom you'll see from Republicans is going toward that. Let's do those roads, because we've got a lot of really bad roads in oil and gas country where they've been used so much and not repaired. So I think you'll see more of it concern over that, then moving, because I have to tell you, here in Albuquerque, we could certainly do with some improvement. The other thing is I have also heard, in fact, is one very vocal Republican senator has been talking about the smaller permanent funds in which only the revenues generated would be used, and that it could continue to grow so that when the bus cycle does come, that we won't be so hard hit, that we can continue. I personally like the idea, the governor's idea of seeing that every child has a free lunch. I don't have children, but I can't imagine a child being able to learn if they're going hungry.
That's right.
So I would like to see some kind of an agreement reached on that.
Let me kind of kick over to Dan here. Just got about 2.5 minutes here. I got a big one here I want all three of you to weigh in on. Daniel, are we at a place now where the governor has to seriously consider some kind of return of this money to the taxpayers, considering how much we have? We might recall she authorized that tax rebate for $1,500 per household earlier in the year, but I'm particularly interested in what's going on in my own whole state of Massachusetts, what's called Chapter 62F. And basically what's happened is the state is mailing out checks to 3 million people in Massachusetts for a partial refund of their state taxes because what they took in has gone over a certain line they determined where money has to be returned to the taxpayer. I'm amazed Republicans haven't started to make this a little noisier, this idea. We have all this money sloshing around. It might be time for some of it to come back to the taxpayer. Are you in agreement on that? And how do we do it if that's something that's
Gene,
agreeable?
I mean, of course I'm in agreement with that. It's their money, right? I mean, this money is coming from, the government doesn't create anything, it takes. Yeah. So, so this is all the people's money. This is a much deeper conversation. I would just say, you raise a great point, and it sounds great on our show, but you're talking about philosophical differences, right? I mean, we have a governor who's not going to run for re-election. She's done after 4 years. So do you need to go out and try to bring the public over to your side now and you're never running for election again? Or do you build legacy programs that you're able to say, you know, are people going to remember 20 years from now that you gave them $3,000 or $4,000, or are they going to have a better stance on remembering that you created a free lunch program or a free bus program? So I do think the money should be going back. I think the money should be going back to people in general. It shouldn't be a need-based give back. It should, you know, there needs to be some opportunity. But I would also say one of the worst things we can do in the state is give more handouts. I mean, this state seems to be the king of finding ways to make people not go get a job, right? How do we get you more assistance for this and more assistance for that? So, you know,
is it really a handout? Does it have to be classified as such? I mean,
I think it does if you're not. I think it does if you're not someone who they're taking the money from. Okay. If it wasn't your money when they took it, then when they take money out of my pocket and give it to Eugene, it's taking from me to give a handout to you.
Senator Feldman, what's your thought on this? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with what's going on in Massachusetts. You don't even have to call, and they just mail you the check. It's not even something you have to apply for or do anything else, or it just gets automatically dumped in your bank account. Is that something we should think about here?
It's hard not to call that a handout, I think. It's contrary to what Dan says. But I think that, first of all, the governor, despite the fact that this is her last term, has already proposed another tax rebate. And remember, the and these things cost a lot of money. The $1,500 that each family got last year, that cost $1.1 billion. That's about a third of the new money for this time. So I think, though, what it points out to me is that now is the time for a tax overhaul, an overhaul of the gross receipts tax, where maybe we could lower the gross receipts tax for everyone and make some other fixes in tax pyramiding. And yes, that's going to cost a little bit of money, but it seems to me like now is the time to do it. And I think that the legislators have an appetite for that, especially in the House.
Good point there. Senator Snyder, I want to give you a shot here. If you can keep it just a little bit short, is this a good idea for New Mexico to start spitting some money back into the taxpayer's pocket out of all these billions we have sloshing around?
Always, I think, to give back to the people who have paid. But when you get into it, that's not always the way it goes. Determining who's going to get the rebate is the challenge that elected officials have. The other thing, just very quickly, is if we continue to grow and let's look first at how I would rather, and of course, people say, well, you just have money. That's not true. But I'd like to see something for the future so that money is being made, that we can also keep our young people here in our state. So let's take a serious look, changing the tax structure, looking for jobs, but we can't just drop the gross receipts tax. If you do that money, when we get the bus cycle, somebody's going to have to come up with that money. So we need a long-term plan and approach to changing.
All the more reason, I'm going to say this, especially for Dee Dee's benefit here, all the more reason for this push for a longer legislative session. And, doling out this kind of money in the session lengths that we have is just a recipe for a lot of trouble. Thanks to our Line Opinion panel for that one. We'll be right back in less than a minute to talk about another issue we're expecting to see in the legislature, and that would be gun control.
Anyone who wants to be a part of our caucus, who wants to caucus with the Democrats, is welcomed. And that's a philosophy that I've carried for a long time. I got started in politics as a community organizer, where I didn't have the privilege to pick and choose who my partners would be. I had to work with whoever was at the table and whoever wanted to work with me to improve the lives of our community members. And I've taken that into politics, and I will continue to take that with me into the Speaker's chair.
Sticking with our Line Opinion panelists, let's turn our attention to another issue we're expecting to come up in the session next month, and that would be gun control. Now, the last few sessions have seen an array of bills on that topic, and this year is no different. Representative-elect Rena Szczepanski from Santa Fe plans to introduce legislation that would raise the age for purchasing an AR-15 style rifle from 18 years old to 21. Now, Daniel, let me start with you on this one. It's a tough subject among some parts of our state. It's happening around the country in some places. Should the age of a minimum age be increased for these size rifles, for these type of rifles, and its chances of passing in the legislature?
I think these are examples of feel-good types of things that you want to do. Here's why I say that. You look at many examples of the things that are going on today, whether they're mass shootings or whether they're just individual crime. Most of these people can't get guns. They're either happening in communities that have strict gun control laws, or they're people who, if they went about getting guns the right way, they wouldn't be able to get a gun. So, raising the age it's not necessarily the thing that I think is going to have the consequences. Do I think it has the chance of passing? Guns are one of the few things in the legislature, especially in New Mexico, that is not necessarily a party issue. It's a rural-urban issue. You start talking about limiting opportunities for guns, purchasing guns, having guns. I can tell you right now, you could be one of the most liberal Democrats from way northern New Mexico, and you're suddenly going to be sitting next to Candy Azell from Roswell and saying, yeah, we're not, my constituents aren't for this. It's a real issue between people in Albuquerque, Santa Fe versus really the rest of the state. So I think you're going to see some of these things brought in. I think you'll find a lot of these things will get turned into some sort of studies and memorials. But I don't foresee there being a huge desire from especially a heavily rural state. And after redistricting more legislators representing rural New Mexico, I don't think you're going to see a lot of movement on anything that limits people's ability to purchase or utilize guns.
Senator Snyder, let me ask you this, though. I mentioned other states have passed similar bills, including California and New Jersey, but California, of course, you might have heard, U.S. Appeals Court in Cali struck down the age change, claiming it violated the Second Amendment. And we have the Benny Hargrove Gun Safety Act here locally, expected to be reintroduced this year by Representative Pamela Herndon. That's the firearm storage bill, make it a crime if a child gains an unauthorized access to a gun. These things are difficult, aren't they? They're hard to get a majority opinion on. But I'm curious on the AR-15 type ban or raising the age limit. Are you with Dan on this? Not a viable idea at this point?
Well, I very much agree with Dan that it's not even at this point. Mm-hmm. I think that the bottom line is you can raise the age, but the people who follow the law are not the ones that laws help. Mm-hmm. I don't see it stopping in any way. I think that just because we didn't see illegal drinking go down when we raised the age on what legalized drinking. Mm-hmm. I just think that two things. We still need education on how to look at and have a gun in your home. I've been, because of a number of different reasons, I myself have been looking to see what the options were for me and talking to friends who have them and the education part. Mm-hmm. But I don't think everybody looks at that first. They just say, something happened, I want a gun. They go out and they find one. And I think it's just like drugs. If you want a gun, you can find one. So I'm not sure that just saying that you have to be 2 years older or 3 years older is going to buy a gun, is going to actually stop people getting guns.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Senator Feldman, let me get you in on this. In the Benny Hargrove Act as well, I should mention the proposed law doesn't specify how a gun should be stored, but says gun owners could be fined $1,000 for storing a weapon in a way that would allow a minor to gain unauthorized access. Not quite sure how one would determine that beyond walking into somebody's home and determining this. But in the overall, Senator, are you anticipating some kind of movement on guns in weaponry here in New Mexico, or are we sort of just posing here, as they say?
No.
Okay.
I am expecting some action this time. When you have a 20-seat majority in the New Mexico House for the mm-hmm. Democrats, I think you can expect something. And I think the Benny Hargrove Act is a likely one to pass. Mm-hmm. It makes sense that gun owners should store their weapons safely in mm-hmm. gun safes or with trigger locks. And that their children should not have the easy kind of access that has led to school shootings. And I think that there's some mm-hmm. consensus on that from both rural and urban legislators in the House. It'll be a little bit more difficult in the Senate. But remember, the legislature, after the last election, when there was a Democratic sweep, did the heavy lifting. And the heavy lifting in terms of gun safety was background checks mm-hmm. And and last time a red flag law.
That's right.
Both of those are already on the books. I think that there needs to be some action this time to fix that red flag law so it is more effective in keeping guns out of the hands of people who are a danger to themselves, have been declared so by law enforcement or by their families. Mm-hmm. So I think that's going to be maybe more likely than the age limitation. But I want to remind you also that we already have an age limitation on certain types of assault weapons.
Right.
That is 21. Mm-hmm. It's just closing a loophole for these particular assault rifles that Rena Stepanski is putting forward her legislation. Mm-hmm. So I think probably most likely there will be, for the things that don't pass, there will be an Office of Gun Safety established to look into more of these.
I hadn't heard that. That's interesting. I wonder how that would work too. I'd like to see the details of that. Daniel, interestingly, right here in the area here, Partners in the Albuquerque Metro Crime Initiative, they prepared a round of bills for the session targeting issues like gun violence, narcotics. Retail crime is huge in our city right now. Improving officer retention, an issue you've talked about in the show for years. Is it important for the legislature to give these bills a hard look for what's inside them, but also give them some legitimacy? How does this work when it comes to actually sitting down amongst fellow legislators?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. First of all, there are some issues that are local issues, right? There's some issues, problems that are Albuquerque's problems that I don't think the legislature should try to fix. It's the city council and the mayor, they got to fix them, sometimes the county commission. But where you have to take a look and say, where are we an impediment towards making things better, right? Okay. And so You know, when you start looking at one of the problems that arises out of a lot of the stuff that, you know, my good friend Senator Feldman talks about, who I love dearly, you know, when they talk about, oh, we're going to look at, you know, should people have these guns? Should people have these guns? The question becomes, who's the ones that are going to make these decisions, right? So police officers start saying, we already have an already overtaxed police department. We don't have enough people, but now we're going to give them 4 more laws that anybody can pick the phone up and say, go check on this person, go do this, go check on that. So, I mean, that's where I think there has to be some serious discussions. I think it also has to do with figuring out, but the legislature's key. You know, when I was there, we were the kings and queens of unintended consequences, right? You know, we said, hey, we're going to help get retired police officers back to work faster by letting them go back to the police departments. Well, you know, we passed that bill. Lo and behold, it didn't help rural New Mexico. Everybody came back to Bernalillo County and Los Alamos and Santa Fe. So we had to go in and then put caps on it. So I think you're going to see a process where hopefully legislators are listening to some of these local entities, the sheriffs, the county commissions, the city councils, and saying, okay, where can we help you? As I found out when I was in the legislature, the best decisions for Roswell are not made in Santa Fe, they're made in Roswell, right? And so you've got to find a way to streamline assisting the local governments making decisions and stop trying to be the person, you know, from 300 miles away that says, I can solve your problem.
Gotcha.
You know, unfortunately, I think the legislature has done the opposite sometimes. They have created unnecessary harm by preempting local action. And that's a problem. For example, in the early 2000s, the legislature preempted local governments from enacting concealed weapon laws, concealed carry laws. And so Albuquerque had wanted to do that, and they were forbidden from doing that by the state.
I'd forgotten all about that. That's a good point there. Thanks again to our line opinion panelists. We'll meet back here one more time in about 15 minutes to talk about the possibility of modernizing our legislature by paying lawmakers. But first, an exclusive one-on-one interview with the state representative who will play a huge role setting the agenda when the session begins. Javier Martinez represents New Mexico's 11th State House District in the heart of Albuquerque, and he's been nominated to become the next House Speaker. Here's New Mexico in Focus correspondent Russell Contreras.
Mr. Speaker nominee Javier Martinez, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
First off, tell our viewers, who is Javier Martinez? Where did he grow up? Who's his family?
Yeah, so I grew up the first 8 years of my life in Ciudad Juarez, just south of the border. I was born in El Paso, 1981, and at the age of 7, in 1989, my father, who worked in construction, brought the whole family here to Albuquerque, and this has been home ever since. I grew up in the International District, right in the middle of the Mesa neighborhood, and my parents are actually still in that area. I've since moved. I'm in the North Valley now, and very proud to represent House District 11, which is the downtown core of Albuquerque.
Since you've become a lawmaker, I've noticed you've had an interest in education, income inequality, immigration. But what keeps you up at night as you've gotten to this point? What really hits your core and your heart about why you're doing the work you're doing?
Yeah, you know, making sure that New Mexico's working families get a fair shake. For far too long, our families did not get that fair shake. We gave away the tax code to out-of-state corporations and the wealthy and put that burden on the back of working people. I'm proud that in the last 8 years that I've been in office, we've worked very hard to reverse that. And now we're at a point where New Mexico is leading this country in terms of policies that benefit working families across the state.
Speaking of that, you know, the legislature, they're going to be walking into an additional $2 billion in surplus. There's a lot of ideas of what should be done. Should we do tax cuts? Should we invest it in certain programs? But from right now, where should that money go?
You know, that's a great question. I think we need to keep building the services and the programs that New Mexicans sorely need and desperately want. Things like quality public education, access to college and higher education, quality early childhood education, inclusive of pre-K childcare, home visitation, and all of the other services that children need prenatal all the way to the age of 5. In addition to that, we're going to continue to work on the tax code to make it more fair and just for working families. That includes rebates for families, and that includes increasing things like the child tax credit. New Mexico is one of very few states with a statewide child tax credit that is built upon the federal one. And we have a chance to increase that to put more money in the pockets of working New Mexicans.
That early childhood education bill, that's something you were very passionate about. Got approved by the voters, the constitutional amendment. You guys will still have to vote and pass a resolution so they can go to Congress. But the Congress is going to be controlled by Republicans here. Are you confident that a Republican-controlled Congress will approve this bill that New Mexican voters approved?
Well, first of all, I'm very proud of our congressional delegation and all of the work that they have been doing, not just now, but over the last 10 years, as you know, as we've waged the battle to invest out of our permanent fund in early childhood education. When you look at the vote results from last month, and over 70% of New Mexicans support the idea, a majority of Republicans in New Mexico support the idea, I have no doubt that whoever controls the Congress will do the right thing and ratify this vote by New Mexico voters.
In a perfect world, what kind of legislation would you like to see go on the governor's desk in your first 30 days as Speaker?
First 30 days, that would be very ambitious. I would probably think more the first 55 days by the time we start getting legislation up to the governor. But I want to see tax relief for working families. I want to see legislation that ensures a quality education for kids from pre-K all the way through college, regardless of their zip code, regardless of their family name, regardless of the language they speak at home. And I want to double down on our efforts to diversify New Mexico's economy. As you know, we've made great strides over the last few years, including the legalization of recreational cannabis, to begin to take ourselves off of the oil and gas addiction that we've had in this country for many, many years. We will continue to do that work, and we will continue to do it for the benefit of working people.
Do you think that if you're pushing tax relief, that's very unusual for a Democratic leader to say this, but do you think that could also be coupled with tax reform, reforming the code? Because that's something that has seen some bipartisan support, but it usually needs a push from the leadership.
Sure. Look, I've sponsored now or co-sponsored 3 or 4 major pieces of tax legislation that have resulted in net tax relief for most New Mexicans. At the same time, we have reformed the code in every single one of those bills. We've done things like restructure our gross receipts tax so that we can bring down the rate and broaden the base a little bit more. We've done reforms to the personal income tax code, which for years, the administrative assistant making $30,000 was paying the same tax rate as the owner of the company who makes $30 million, right? We've undertaken a lot of those reforms over the last 8 years, and we will continue to do that. What's important for people to understand is that the tax code is very complicated, and it's not just here in New Mexico, it's across the board, right? I like to joke that tax codes across the country were written by accountants and lawyers, right? To keep themselves employed probably. At the end of the day, we will continue to make those reforms, to make the tax code more fair, more equitable, and to simplify the code as well.
This state continues to struggle with poverty. I mean, we were ranked 49th, 50th. Republicans usually say, well, Democrats have had control of both chambers for years. Nothing's changed. You can also say that about Mississippi. Republicans have controlled both of their chambers for years. Nothing's changed, and they tend to be 49th and 50th. So my question to you is, we haven't been able to grasp and tackle poverty. Is there anything that you can do long term? You mentioned early childhood education that can finally turn the state around and address its income inequality and poverty?
I think access to quality early childhood education is the long-term transformative strategy. But it's long-term, right? It'll take years for us to see the results. There's a lot of stuff that we could do, though, in the meantime. The Kids Count report that came out 6 months ago or so and showed us 49th, 50th, one of the takeaways from that report from the group that published it, New Mexico Voices for Children, was that because of the pandemic, right, we had rates of poverty that otherwise we may not have had, given a lot of the tax work that we've done, a lot of the poverty alleviation work that we've done the last 6 years. I'm confident, I'm sure that in the next Kids Count report and the ones that come after that, we'll begin to see the needle moving a little bit more on those conditions. Now, keep in mind, New Mexico is not a poor state, right? And I've said that time and time and time again. New Mexico is a wealthy state. We've got vast natural resources. We've got vast wealth tied up in our permanent funds, as you know. The problem is we have not invested that money in targeted, effective ways that uplift most families. Keep in mind, in 2003, we had a tax bill that reduced the rates for the highest earners in half, and we placed that burden on the backs of working people. What happened 6 years later? The Great Recession. And state government in New Mexico was essentially broke because we didn't have the resources coming in. That is one of the things we have to be very cognizant of moving forward, is making sure that New Mexico can not only continue to fund government services, schools, healthcare, education, pre-K, but that we can fund those at quality levels so that they yield quality returns. And that's what I'm most proud of, right? Over the last 8 years, we've begun that process, we've begun that movement. We're not gonna undo 100 years in 6 years, but I can tell you we are well underway.
When you take that gavel, you will be presiding over a body that has probably its highest number of women lawmakers in state history since we become a state in 1912. What could you do as Speaker to make sure that women lawmakers have a voice in legislation, on the floor, and what stuff comes to the floor?
Yeah, no, great question. Look, it is no secret that particularly the House Democratic Campaign Committee, which is the political arm of our caucus, has made it a point over the last 6 years to recruit, to develop, to train diverse candidates from across the state, including women, people of color, and people who live in many, many of our communities. Part of that process is because we want to diversify not only our caucus, but the entire chamber. And I'm proud of the work that we've done, and I'm proud of the numbers that, as you know, we have a majority of our members are women. Most of our committee chair positions are with women. Those positions are very important in terms of how legislation moves or doesn't move in a legislature. And then if you look at our leadership team, our number 2 and number 3 leaders in our caucus are 2 women, one of them a woman of color, the first Indian American to serve in a position of leadership in the New Mexico legislature. So I'm beyond thrilled, excited, and I can tell you some of the most transformative legislation I've seen in my 8 years in office has been carried and pushed through and passed by women.
On that note, the diversity, it's a strength, but also could be a challenge, because the Democratic Party is a big tent party. You still have divisions, even though you have a majority, between urban versus rural, between progressives versus moderates, even between, just be honest, Anglo versus Latino or Hispanic versus Native American. How are you as a speaker going to work with this coalition to make sure there's not splits that could kill legislation?
Look, I'm a big believer in, as you know, diversity in all its forms, including cognitive diversity. I don't want people to just agree with me, and I don't want to just have to agree with other people. It is in those debates, it is in those discussions, it is in those arguments that legislation is improved and ultimately passed. I've seen it time and time and time again with the bills that I've carried and bills that I've helped others carry and pass. The Democratic Party is a big tent party, and I'm very proud of that. Anyone who wants to be a part of our caucus, who wants to caucus with the Democrats, is welcomed. And that's a philosophy that I've carried for a long time. I got started in politics as a community organizer, where I didn't have the privilege to pick and choose who my partners would be. I had to work with whoever was at the table and whoever wanted to work with me to improve the lives of our community members. And I've taken that into politics, and I will continue to take that with me into the Speaker's chair.
Now, this is a state that is majority minority. Almost 50% of its residents are Hispanic. But in recent years, it seemed like white progressives from Santa Fe have controlled the Democratic Party. Do they hold too much influence in the Democratic Party?
You know, I'll disagree with that notion. I mean, I think that the Democratic Party is controlled by our grassroots, by our activists, by the moms and dads who are working every single day to put food on their families' tables. I think these distinctions between, you know, whether it's white progressives or brown progressives or whatever the case might be, I even don't really like the word progressive, to be honest with you, right? Because we're all just trying to do what's best for the state.
Do you like the word liberal?
I personally like the word liberal a little bit better. I think it better defines who I am. But I'll tell you what, I mean, there's a long list of bills where I may not be in agreement with the liberal base of my party. And there's a long list of bills where I may not be in agreement with the moderate part of my party or even the conservative side of my party. At the end of the day, it's about doing what's best for New Mexico. It's about common sense solutions to bring relief to the people who need it most. The unhoused, right? Those struggling with drug addiction. Children with families who are struggling with homelessness, drug addiction, or behavioral health. Those are the things that matter to me. And whether you call me progressive, liberal, conservative, moderate, so be it.
Margaret Montoya, she is the well-known UNM law professor and also a pioneer scholar in critical race theory, known around the world. She's also your mother-in-law.
Yeah.
How has she influenced you as you've gone on this journey?
Wow, that's a great question. She has influenced me more than I can ever express to her and more than she'll ever know. I'm part of those groups of first-generation college students and first-generation law students, right? So that pipeline narrows the further you get, as you can imagine. And she is someone who, before I even met her daughter, was bending over backwards for students like me to be able to take our lived experience and share that with, in my case, the law school, right? There are many times when I didn't feel like I belonged in that space, but it was professors like her, and her specifically, who would look us in the eye and say, absolutely, you belong here. Your story matters. To me, I wouldn't be an elected official. I wouldn't be a very effective community organizer. I wouldn't be an effective lawyer if it wasn't for her. And I know that I'm not alone. She is known across the world, really, and she has mentees from coast to coast who call her and email her and send her Christmas cards all the time. And I'm just honored to be a part of her family now.
In her last 30 seconds, as I mentioned, she's a pioneer in critical race theory. If you get an anti-critical race theory bill on your desk, is it dead on arrival?
Critical race theory is an academic theory that oftentimes is offered as an elective course, usually in graduate programs. I cannot think of any bill that would be anti-critical race theory that would ever reach my desk if the sponsor knows what they're doing, and generally they don't. I've already seen 2 or 3 bills in previous sessions, and they're completely irrelevant to the discussion. Sure, probably dead on arrival, but probably won't even get that far.
Thank you, Speaker nominee, for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's welcome back our line opinion panelists for one final discussion as we look ahead to the 2023 session. Now, earlier this month, we sat down with Mario Jimenez of Common Cause New Mexico to talk about a recent poll from the research and polling firm showing a majority of voters were in favor of modernizing the state's legislature. That could mean things like lengthening the session, past the 30 and 60-day mark, hiring full-time staff for elected officials, and the biggie, Senator Snyder, I'll start with you, paying lawmakers a salary. New Mexico is currently the only state, as you know, that doesn't pay lawmakers a salary, a fact that surprised most who were polled in the survey. It was interesting, only 32% saying they knew that. Is this the right time to modernize the state legislature, given all the other things that are out there in the air? We have the money to do it, we have the will to do it, we seem to have a desire from the public to do it. Do we have a moment here? Is this the time?
I think so, and it makes me think. I remember back when we tried to raise the per diem.
All right.
And the way that it had to be written was, the legislators' per diem shall be no more than that of the city of Santa Fe.
Yes.
And so people thought we were, containing that it couldn't go. We were doing that to keep those legislators under control, when in fact it did increase the actual cash value of the per diem. I found that the survey very interesting in light of that, of how much the public has changed in its thinking, or at least this survey shows that. I think there will still be some opposition the old guard theory is that, well, they knew what they were getting into. But I have to tell you, when I was in for 8 years, and when I left, I had a tremendous debt as a result of that. My credit cards were higher than anything I had ever wanted to be, but I wanted to be able to participate, and in $135, I think it was then, did not cover sleeping and eating. And no, we don't get wined and dined all the time. We do get some, but I have to tell you, one breakfast burrito does not change how I'm going to vote on something.
It does me if I'm hungry. If I'm starving, you get 2 breakfast burritos on hand.
Well, but I mean, I'm serious. So yes, but to me, the absolute most important thing, and I advocated this in several different occasions, is a staff, a paid staff that I can depend on. And don't get me wrong, the Legislative Council service is excellent. They do a marvelous job, but I want they have to serve all 112 of us. So I would like to have someone that worked. We even put in a bill one time that said, or discussed it maybe, that we would share in the same way we Republicans have always used to share secretaries, is that would one staff person to take care of 2 legislators.
Right.
Anything to help us do a better service to our constituents.
Let me ask Dan that very issue. I mean, during your time, how would things have been different if you had a full-time staffer? Would it have been appreciably better, or?
Well, I don't think it would have been for me. I was fortunate enough that I owned a business in Roswell. My sign was outside the business, but I did have a full-time person that worked for me that I paid, she probably spent 70% of her time dealing with constituent stuff. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have been able to do the things I do. So it's important. I mean, it's not easy to get to Santa Fe and schedule the time to get into a committee meeting. And, it would be helpful because, the number of phone calls. I remember one time getting a phone call, and there's a difference again between rural and urban New Mexico. Up here, when I moved to Rio Rancho in Albuquerque, legislators are sort of thought of like city councilors. Where I lived in Roswell, legislators lots of times were thought of congressmen. I remember getting a call one time and some older gentleman yelling at me about why my staff isn't doing what they need to do and my staff should be more on it. And he sent me a letter and he can't believe that his taxpayers are paying my staff. And I said, hold on a second, let you talk to my chief of staff. And I handed the phone to Josh, who was 4 years old at the time. And Josh was like, hello. And the guy was trying to have a conversation with my 4-year-old son. And I had to explain to him, there was no staff.
That's right.
When you're sending it to my home and to my emails. So I think before we look at paying people, because at the end of the day, the $1 million question is, what do you pay them, right? I mean, $50,000 a year? I can tell you right now, I don't know many business leaders, lawyers, doctors, teachers that are going to quit their job for $50,000 a year to be a legislator. Do you pay them $275,000 a year? I don't know, right? What is the right number? Florida has kind of an interesting concept where they pay them, I think it's now like $50,000 a year, and they're allowed to have a job. But you have to file your job with the state. You got to let the Legislative Ethics Committee know who you are, and they have staff. They have a hometown office that they have their staffers work in, and they get a budget and all of that stuff. So I would imagine some sort of a hybrid may come up. But at the end of the day, I don't think our state's that bad off that, we get 112 knuckleheads together for 30 days one year and 60 days the next, and they get to go home and live amongst the people and have to answer for their decision-making process. I think to some level, our system seems to be pretty good. The last thing I would say is we talk about getting people to run. Last time I checked, every couple of years in the House, there are not a lot of races that are going unopposed. Yeah. Somebody's got a primary, some incumbents being challenged. So it's not like we're lacking the ability to find candidates to run. So I think we're in a unique situation, and sometimes for our state, the answer may not be changing it.
Let me ask Senator Feldman about that, because the public, according to the 800 plus that were polled by Research and Polling, they have a very different opinion about this than what Dan just sort of laid out there. How should we internalize what this poll is asking? What is the marketplace asking for, so to speak?
Well, first off, let me issue a disclaimer in that I do work sometimes for Common Cause New Mexico.
That's it. No credibility, Dee Dee. You got none. You can't answer this question.
So I knew about this poll before. You know, it used to be that the assumption among legislators was that the public would oppose paying legislators because they don't like politicians. They don't want to pay politicians. But what we found is that every year, as New Mexico languishes last in terms of employment, last in terms of poverty, and inability to solve some of these intractable problems, every year we've seen the public support for modernizing the legislature go up.
That's right.
And it has done that for a number of years. And now I agree with Diane. The time has come. It is the right thing to do to provide adequate staff and resources to legislatures so that they can do their job, so that they can serve their constituents. I'm with Diane. When I was in the New Mexico Senate, I spent my campaign funds to survey my constituents to find out what they wanted. Wow. That should be a function of every legislature, and they should be paid to do it. But they aren't. Now, only the people who can afford to subsidize their own service serve in the New Mexico legislature. And that is a certain age group. Yeah. There are many people that are retired. There are many people that, have full-time jobs or businesses, lawyers, realtors, insurance guys. Not so much the ordinary Joe from New Mexico.
Senator, is our system set up to be able to deal with a $12 billion budget? Meaning we have a lot of money coming into the state, and we're supposed to be doling out money, in a way that's coherent and benefits people. Is that really possible in our system as we have it now?
Not according to the legislators themselves. In addition to this poll, there was another survey taken of legislators by the Bureau of Business and Economic Research out of UNM. And it was the subject of a hearing at the Courts and Criminal Justice Interim Committee. And legislators were surveyed, and the majority of those surveyed said, we do not have enough time to become experts on roads and infrastructure and understand what the implications are of spending $12 billion. We need to develop expertise. We need some professional staff that can provide constituent services, as well as becoming an expert on certain subjects. That's what every legislator dreams of, to become an expert in taxes or to become an expert in healthcare.
Judging by the comments you hear on national television all the time, we have a full-time group in Washington, D.C., and I wouldn't classify most of them as experts on anything. So I'm not sure.
Is that a good enough reason not to do anything, though, Dan? I mean, about
I don't think the system is that broken here. I don't think the system is that broken, Gene.
Well, let me put this out there to Senator
Snyder.
Let
me just say this to you before you go, Senator Snyder. I think having a phone poll is one thing. I think if you put this thing out for a vote, it will die a horrible death as a constitutional amendment to pay legislators. I think you're going to have to do exactly what Senator Snyder said, which is we will pay them no more, and you'll have to trick people into voting for it. I think people like to answer polls when it comes time to action. They're not going to vote to put people to work and pay them $60,000, $70,000 a year.
Senator Snyder, you have about 20 seconds if you had a thought there.
Okay. I was just going to say that don't compare the New Mexico legislature and reasons to not do this with Congress, because over the years I've worked a lot with Congress, and I know that they have staff people who are incredible in their subjects.
And we have plenty of smart people that could be very good staffers here.
And we don't need a constitutional amendment, Gene, to have staffers. The legislature could make a decision to do this staff thing without going.
I think the Common Cause folks mentioned that there might be some action on that this session, because that is a separate thing you can kind of carve out. Got to say thanks again to you guys as the Line panel as always this week. Now be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics the Line covered on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. And catch any episodes you may have missed on the PBS Video app on your Roku or Smart TV. Thank you once again to our panel of political insiders. We're keeping an eye on policy developments around the state, including in our largest city. Next week on the show, I sit down with Albuquerque Mayor Tim Keller to talk about the city's housing issues. We get into the new plan for the city and what they're rolling out, called the Housing Forward Initiative. And I ask about the future of safe outdoor spaces after a public back and forth with council over the last few months. Don't miss my exclusive interview with Mayor Keller next Friday at 7 o'clock, right here on NMPBS. Now, for now, thanks again for joining us, for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.